Hello, hi, and welcome to another episode of Wellness in the Workplace. My name is Mbali Mzinyane, and I am your host. Wellness in the Workplace is a podcast that aims to equip new and experienced professionals with the tools and insights to navigate challenging workplace dynamics. And in today's episode, we are talking about living and working with mental illness. And I have with me in studio Dr. Samke Ngcobo, who is a medical doctor. She's a keynote speaker. She's an author. She's a corporate wellness specialist now. And we'll be talking about her journey in mental wellness, as well as the fact that she has been living with bipolar disorder since the tender age of 14. Welcome to Wellness in the Workplace, Dr. Samke.
Thank you so much, Mbali. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for making the time to be here. So today's topic is about living and working with mental illness. And before we get into just the meat of our discussion, can you tell us a bit more about your background, how it was like growing up before your diagnosis?
So I grew up in Durban, KwaZulu-Natal, a very strict and loving family, very structured, I would say. But like every other family, there are challenges. So age of 14, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I'd say I lived a very stable life, pre-diagnosis, and even after the diagnosis, I would say. So very loving childhood, go to church, strict background. But I say that because it had its own challenges later in life. So age of 14, I was then diagnosed, very difficult time in my life. But, one has navigated it and yeah.
So what were some of the events actually that led to your diagnosis? Because it's not just something that comes out of nowhere. So what happened to lead to, you getting a professional diagnosis and potentially getting on treatment following that?
So I was displaying behavior that was increasingly abnormal, basically, by the standards of my parents. So as you know, a 14-year-old, they deemed to be moody. You don't expect anything outside of the mood changes as you're growing up, and there's hormonal changes. But my behavior was escalating with seriousness as time was passing on. I was speaking to relatives you couldn't see. I felt that people were listening to my thoughts, and my behavior was just escalating in abnormality to a point where I felt like my home was like a prison, and I didn't want to be at home. So I was trying to just get out of the house because I felt like I was being locked inside. So as this behavior was becoming increasingly abnormal and disturbing to my parents, that's when they decided to pursue the help. I say that because so people can know that, I could not have possibly diagnosed myself at that time or have an awareness that I have a condition at all. My parents were just proactive in pursuing the help that was necessary for me. So that was my first contact with mental health care services that long ago to this point that I am today. But, my diagnosis was, my first presentation was to a psychologist who then later referred me to a psychiatrist when she realized that it's not just a psychological issue, but it's a psychiatric challenge as well.
So for any of our viewers or listeners who might not know what bipolar is, can you just give an overview of some of the symptoms and the behavioral symptoms really that are present for anyone with bipolar disorder? And I know with you specifically, you have you're living with bipolar type 1. What is that? Yeah.
So bipolar disorder is a type of mental illness, and in the past used to just be a clear-cut, differentiating space where they just say you have depression or you have bipolar, and it's a mood diagnosis. But with time, it's later deemed to be on a spectrum where there's the mood symptoms and then psychotic symptoms where you're out of touch with reality completely. So it now exists in a spectrum as opposed to saying it's just the opposite of depression or the difference, it's a mood disorder. So previously, just to make it easier to explain, bipolar disorder type 1 is one where you have a manic episode, and then bipolar type 2 is the one where you have hypomanic symptoms. So there's irritability, elevated mood, there's disorganized behavior, there's one is pacing around. There's high-risk behavior as well, which plays a role in the symptoms. But the irritability is, for me, one of the telltale signs that there's something that's going on with me that's unusual. So not just your ordinary I'm irritated with you, but it just becomes excessively abnormal. The disorganized behavior, can't sleep at all, pacing through the night. So that's what makes it different. And I think with time, when they say it exists in a spectrum, is because, you know, the psychotic element definitely plays a role in the symptoms when you have a manic and psychotic episode, where you're completely out of touch with reality. So yeah, that's bipolar disorder as an umbrella. Then there's bipolar type 1 and bipolar type 2. And
do you mind sharing a bit more about type 2 as well?
Type 2 is where you have the hypomanic symptoms. So you have had a manic episode, but not a full-on one. That would be, you know, the one you've had in bipolar type 1. So I just wanted to say, just to simplify it as best as possible, to say how is bipolar different to depression as well. I think it would be important to explain that, because oftentimes people don't even know where to place bipolar. So with depression, it used to be called unipolar depression, where there's something, let's call it a middle line, where you're euthymic, and then you go below that line where you have a depressive episode. With bipolar, it used to be, you know, two poles, so to speak, where there's your middle line, which is euthymia, but then with bipolar, you either go way above that line or way below that line. It's just a way of just simplifying it for somebody that wishes to understand it in a very basic sense. So you just have extremes of mood that can alert people to an abnormality. And the sad thing is that many people are often unidentified and live with this difficulty.
And just after your diagnosis, how did your livelihood really change, you know, with the diagnosis and I guess with the treatment? And, you know, added to that question, what type of treatment then did you start taking?
You know, mental illness in general is expensive. I often say that, and bipolar
inaccessible.
Disorder, absolutely, majority can't access the quality of care that one may say I'm privileged to have, but even with me having it, it's like, my goodness, it's so expensive. So I spend on average a month in total 10,000 Rand related to my healthcare and my mental health care alone. And you know, I often say that it's like my German vehicle in a way, because it's so expensive. So I pay medical aid. The, you know, standard medical aid. Then many of the medication is not covered by the medical aid. So there's things called co-payments where I have to pay on my own. So then there's an additional 3,000, 4,000 Rand. Then there's my follow-up with the psychiatrist, which because my illness is quite severe, I have to follow up every month. Other people, when they're more stable, they come maybe twice a year, once a year, just to repeat their scripts. But mine, my psychiatrist says I need to see you often because things go very wrong very quickly. Then there's me seeing my psychologist, and 15 sessions is not enough to cover a whole year of treatment. So medical aid often covers 15 sessions combined for psychology and psychiatrist, but that just becomes depleted within 3 months. So it really is a marginalizing illness that often compromises people who can't afford at all, and the availability of the medication. So it's a very high maintenance condition. So livelihood definitely has become impacted. I have to prioritize that. It's not a luxury. I have to attend to this in order to have a good quality of life and sit in front of you today.
So you're a medical doctor by profession, and we know that the medical profession is quite demanding. So not just the studies, but the actual practice of it. How did you navigate your academics at the time, living with bipolar disorder and going into the workspace, being a young professional, having to learn things like boundaries and communicating this illness that you're living with? What was that journey like for you?
You know, with bipolar disorder, I think if I had one adjective to describe my medical studies, I'd say it was chaotic. That's when my illness flared up in the worst way. I'd say, I mean, I've had worse episodes, as you'll probably discuss further, but that chapter of my life had the most frequent relapses. So high school, I passed very well, got into medical school with a bursary. Life was quite stable, first year, second year, third year. Then life just took a turn for the worst. In the sense that I was becoming admitted twice a year at times, once a year at times, and the various rotations and specialties are 6 weeks in general. So if you're doing psychiatry and aesthetics, it's 6 weeks at a time. If I'm admitted for 3 weeks of those 6 weeks and then I have to recover another 2 weeks, how much time have I spent in that rotation? So obviously I didn't finish in the glamorous record time because I had to navigate my illness. So it's so challenging. One of the biggest things was my denial of my mental illness. I absolutely could not accept, because I'd see patients in the wards that were so sick and I couldn't identify to think that I'm one of those patients, because I know myself in a well state, and then I'm seeing people who are unwell and so severely unwell, and I thought I can't be one of them. I had a them versus me mentality. So with time, my parents struggled a lot with me. They would be frustrated, and I often say that I know every trick in the book that patients pull because I did all those things. Flush the medication, put it under my pillow, pretend to swallow it, put it under my tongue, all those things to avoid having to take the treatment, because I thought I'd be that bipolar person who doesn't need the medication. I'm the unique one, So I used to intellectualize that I have this condition, but I only accepted it in the truest sense 5 years ago. So that was 16 years, a very complicated, chaotic journey of 16 years to persuade me that not only do you have this, but you actually need to take it seriously. So, medical school is very challenging. There's times where I'd insist to go to an exam and I wasn't in a condition to actually do that exam, because I was still in that space. And then there was the side effects of the treatment where I ballooned from 57 kilograms to 87 kilograms within 4 months. So you can imagine being a young person where you're known to be a certain way, and then all of a sudden people see you differently, and at such a rapid rate. My career itself earlier on wasn't too hectic, I'd say, in terms of my illness. It was quite under control, so to speak. So the most chaotic time was during my studies, but then it flared up quite badly in recent years.
Sure. That's very interesting. So what were you experiencing at, I guess, a self-awareness level? When you say you were going through, times of denial, do you think it was a lack of self-awareness on your part, or do you think it was a lack of understanding of this illness that you were living with? And how did you then, move from a place of being in denial to acceptance? Because those are on completely different ends of the spectrum.
Absolutely. And it was a combination of all those things you're asking me about. I had no insight. I had never been properly sat down and had it explained to me that this is what bipolar means. As you were asking me, what is bipolar? I intellectualized it. I've been to medical school, so I knew it as a textbook kind of explanation, and I couldn't relate with that. So there was the denial, there was a lack of insight, there was a lack of understanding as well. Oftentimes when things are made to be intellectual, we made to seem like we accept them when we don't necessarily do. And I think that was the same thing for me. I intellectualized that, okay, I have this condition, but the day-to-day of living with it was a completely different thing for me. So, my illness has had its very difficult moments, but then to move from a space of not understanding it, lacking insight, being in denial, it was a journey, a 16-year journey, as I said to you. And I think the difference with that, what caused the shift was my life-changing admission in 2017, where I had a multidisciplinary team management, where I was seen by psychologists, seen by psychiatrists. Occupational therapists are so important. And that was life-changing, setting boundaries, learning those things. I didn't understand. I'd sit there during this 21-day admission and they'd say, one of the things that's compromising your mental health is that you have no boundaries. And I thought, what are boundaries?
What do you mean?
What is a boundary? It was I was just that blank about it. And they'd say, those things are impacting your mental health. So I think that question is so important, because oftentimes when people think mental illness, they think tablets. Take your pills, you'll be fine. But it's actually a holistic kind of a picture that one needs to attend to, holistic management that people need to realize and understand that play a role in one's mental well-being. So it was 2017 where I had a very patient psychiatrist, who's my current psychiatrist, who explained to me, this is what your illness means, this is how you behave, these are the concerns. And I think that's when the shift happened. And I'm grateful that I had the support from the beginning of my illness, but I just imagine how much further I'd be had I had earlier intervention at this capacity.
Yeah. And I'm sure that's maybe improved your relationship with yourself and how you see yourself and, how you show up also in the world, right? But just going back to the question around, the workplace. When you entered the workplace, did you communicate that you were living with this illness? And, did you then set, I guess, the necessary expectations of how you would want that to be received within the workplace?
So from the beginning of every, work environment that I'd enter, I would communicate it to people who I deem to be safe spaces, because it can go horribly wrong if you declare an illness or a condition that's so highly stigmatized to the wrong people. So I've worked in the Department of Psychiatry for 5 years, and when I arrived for the first interview for a more junior role, I told them that, I told the professors that, I have this condition, because they'd ask me, why do you want to get into mental health services? And I'd say, because I'm living this, it just makes sense. Even though I was very naive in how I answered. But I'd said it so clearly, and it was very important, because when things were going wrong in my life or when I'd relapse, they had an awareness, and then the support was therefore there. Not completely from every single person or every single department or hospital, but where it mattered, they knew, and the support was there. It's been a journey in that regard, and one that it wasn't compulsory for me to say, because people don't ask you, do you have a mental illness? But I found it important to have that sort of awareness, and should I need the support?
Yes. And did you find that in some instances, you experience, I guess, the stigma around mental health, and how did you navigate that?
No, absolutely. I did experience stigma. One of the biggest things I find, if you're going to come today and you're speaking like you are, and you're presentable, then you disappear the next day and you're going for a 21-day admission to hospital. You don't have to tell your colleague that you are admitted. So I think people knew that I'd have to be away for some days and weeks. They didn't know the reason. And, medicine is very grueling. So in my absence, someone had to take over the same work. So they'd have to take on their own workload and my additional workload. So feelings of resentment can creep up in that regard. They don't know why I'm not even there. And if they saw me on Friday well and well kempt, and then Monday I'm not there, it's hard to believe that this person is in hospital. And unless you've broken a leg, and then people will know
it's
that
visible.
you were in an accident, and then they understand, they'll send you cards. But if you sometimes people just think you're in some hotel somewhere, just chilling,
taking
relaxing.
time off.
Absolutely. So I recall a time when somebody had to take on my responsibilities, and my senior or my superior knew, because she's the one that actually helped me get a referral and to my current psychiatrist. So she had an understanding, she knew, and then the work had to be allocated to this particular person. So I had no awareness who had taken over my work. So while I'm in hospital, I had access to my phone, and the person says, your work is hectic. So initially, I'm like, yes, I'm sure it is. All the best. I can imagine I've had a hectic ward, because it's 40 patients that I'm managing. And, the next day, the ward is so hectic. And I couldn't understand that there's resentment building up of, where are you? Because I'm taking on your work. It's only in hindsight. And then still in that same admission, a colleague of mine said, hi Samke, how are you doing? I'm like, I'm well, thanks. I'm thinking, wow, this is so sweet. How are you keeping? I'm like, no, I'm doing better. I'm carrying on, And then the question came in right there. It was like, please let us know when you'll be back, because we're doing allocations for the calls and allocations for next month. So never mind that I might not make it alive in this current state. I'm unwell to attend to anyone's health. But the premise of that message and call wasn't to say, Samke, how are you? It was to say, when are you coming back? So definitely there's a stigma to it. And if you're always somebody that has it together or perceived to have it together, and then all of a sudden you're not there, and you're saying, no, I'm doing better, people don't know what's going on. So definitely there is an element of stigma, because to say you're going to be away for 21 days is quite something, because in the medical fraternity, one, your work is not necessarily divided as such to other people, it may be given to that other person to take over. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're getting paid more.
Exactly.
So feelings of resentment can definitely happen.
Sure. So how do we then create these environments that are compassionate and empathetic and safe for people to speak up about mental illness, in a way that is going to be conducive to their well-being within that environment?
I think we have a long way to go, I'll be honest, because I think the biggest challenge is that mental health issues are not taken as seriously as saying you had a head injury, you passed out, you were in a coma, you were in a car accident, If you're having if you're saying you have a mental health issue right now, for as long as you're delivering, people don't necessarily care what your issue is. That sense of, we have worse problems, so why are you complaining? That kind of a thing. It's still not legitimized at a level that I think it should be. And I think that's the biggest problem. I mean, now we're having these conversations, which is fantastic in terms of pushing, in terms of pushing the narrative of taking wellness more seriously than what it is. It's not a luxury. So I think, increasing empathy, increasing compassion, that kind of thinking will happen if people are psychoeducated about mental health and mental illness. And I think that's where I fit in, I think, in the space of mental health and mental wellness, is that it's legitimate. We are not defined by it, but definitely it's something to be taken seriously. I think because my quality of life is literally the difference between the care I have or not. So I know the difference on how debilitating a mental illness can be. And because of that, I'm so passionate to change the narrative towards mental health and mental illness. And I mean, before we came on camera, you mentioned that, you've pivoted into the corporate wellness space. Can you tell us a bit more about that, some of the work that you do? And I think you've just given some context as to why you're passionate about that. Yes. So I've currently, literally very recently, got into the wellness space in corporate. I feel like it's a perfect fit for me. So I don't know for how long, but I've hung my stethoscope for now. It's a different setting. So I'm with my company, Vocal Mentality. I've partnered with some really great organizations who see the value of what I do and seem to understand what I'm doing. Because oftentimes people will say, what are you doing? If you're not in a hospital, what exactly are you doing? Because you're a doctor. Who speaks mental health. So where do you fit in? So I've just joined or partnered with a corporate since last month. Actually, it's been a month. They invited me to be part of their team, their wellness team.
Amazing.
And we work with the employee assistance program. So, there's different organizations which attend to wellness. And so I see employees, assess, their stresses, also interview them about what are things that are heavy for them. And oftentimes you discover that personal issues spill into the workspace. So it's just, doing referrals to them, sort of debriefing as well. I do have the background in mental health care services, so that's quite an advantage for me as well. So with Vocal Mentality, I'm just so grateful that people are starting to understand what I'm doing and the thinking behind it and the intention behind it.
And how do you think just integrating corporate wellness into just, organizations and employee wellness programs is going to help with just the productivity, sustainability, and ultimately, at the end of the day, I guess, profitability of these organizations?
I think it's critical. Employees need to feel that they're cared for beyond their deliverables. I think, oftentimes people are on a hamster wheel having to deliver literally from Monday to Friday, and to feel that there's a wellness space or an outlet for them makes them feel that they matter beyond what they are delivering in terms of deadlines. So I think it's a revolution. I think I'm so grateful and happy to be part of that, because when I feel that my wellness, not just my work itself matters, my well-being itself also counts. I think it's a very major thing. And as you're saying, that it helps then the sustainability, productivity, the profitability of the company, because people are in a healthier space to deliver what is expected of them.
And just pivoting into, your book, Reflections of a Convoluted Mind, A Journey with My Mental Illness, why was it important for you to document your journey and share it in this way?
Oh, Reflections of a Convoluted Mind is
Yeah.
my joy and pride.
Yeah.
Very vulnerable book.
And I can imagine. I'm still to read it.
I didn't think I would ever write a book. Rather, let me say, I didn't think I'd write a book before the age of 40 because I felt that when I'm maybe at 45, I won't care what people have to say about what I reveal. Just to backtrack so that there's a better understanding, I had a major relapse 2 years ago.
Okay.
So I've had really terrible episodes of my illness, but the one 2 years ago was the worst because it was public. So I mean, there's famous musicians that we know of doing very strange things, and people will laugh at whatever they're doing. So I had a full on display, and people had never seen me unwell. People see this well put together person who seems to have it in control, but I had a relapse whereby I ended up having an involuntary admission as well to a state facility because I was so unwell. Private institutions don't have the capacity to look after involuntary patients. So there's different categories, basically, just to explain briefly, of admission. So there's a voluntary admission where you present yourself to a mental health care service. Assisted, you're not fighting it, but you do need the admission. And then you're a danger. The involuntary one is where you're a danger to other people, you're a danger to yourself, and you have to be. So people fill forms on your behalf, basically, ensuring that. So many private healthcare spaces don't have that. So then the state facilities do have. So due to the series of very unfortunate events, like unfortunate in the worst way, really, I ended up in a state facility in KwaZulu-Natal, a hospital that wasn't as equipped as maybe the ones I've worked in, which are state as well. It was just so horrible from start to finish. And I think that's what activated the activist that you see today and the advocate in mental health that you see today. And I vowed, well, I was still manic as well during that time, where I vowed to the other patients, I said, I'll rescue you. I will rescue you. You know, I just felt that responsibility to be that Hercules that's going to save everybody. And I felt a responsibility from then to use my medical experience as a doctor, and I felt like I'll be taken a bit more seriously when I have the background of mental health, and then to bring my illness to the fore. So because my relapse was so severe, there was my brain functioning was compromised. So I came back from my admission. My doctor said she's still booking me off. She says, Samke, you're still unwell, you're still a bit manic, so I'll book you off for 3 weeks. So I was booked off for 3 weeks. Letters were submitted. I returned for my follow-up appointment, and she says, Samke, and I could tell something was not 100% with me. Everything was just like a hazy kind of a space. So she then says to me, Samke, I need to book you off for longer than 3 weeks. I'm like, oh, okay. So we're doing this for another 3 weeks. He says, no, you need rehabilitation for 6 months. I've heard at a distance that some people are booked off work for a year, but I never thought that it would be you. So had to be formal forms, submitted to HR for incapacity leave for 6 months. And if my identity has been, a large part of my identity has been being in a hospital working for 6 months, what do I do with myself on a day-to-day? I didn't plan a sabbatical, and I'm unwell as well. It's not like a holiday of sorts. So I asked, what do I do with myself? And she says, no, I don't know. Whatever you do, you can be in the mall, you can be walking around in the park, but you incapacity leave, you can't be booked on incapacity and then be working elsewhere because you're still getting a fraction of your income. So initially I was devastated, and I thought, oh, okay, I'm just going to have this routine where I go to the park, Walter Sisulu, every Wednesday. I had this routine planned, but now my discharge from hospital was 2 weeks before lockdown, level 5.
Yeah, when you said 2 years ago, I just thought COVID, pandemic.
Absolutely. So as I start this leave, I'm then we're told by the president that, okay, there's no Walter Sisulu anytime soon. So I literally was going to be housebound. And, beginning of that year, I had thought maybe this book project should happen. I don't know what it would be about, but the key was I'll never be vulnerable. I don't want to be vulnerable. I don't want to be personal. That was the deal. I don't know how one writes a book where you can't be vulnerable.
You can't be vulnerable.
Yeah,
yes.
I won't be vulnerable and I won't tell my story in that sense. I don't know if I thought I'm going to write a novel, maybe a fiction one. So then I spoke to my publisher and I said, you know what, let's get this thing going. I'm 6 months bound at home. I'm going to lose my mind continuing to just sit and not do anything that's of substance as such. Then I wrote Reflections of a Convoluted Mind. I didn't know what to call it.
Yeah, the title is
very catchy. You would laugh at the various titles that I'd come up with, but I remember the one day at 8 p.m. I called them. I said, I've got the title. Reflections of a Convoluted Mind, a journey with my mental illness. I felt that people need to understand in a very raw way what it is to live with a mental illness. What is the journey of mental illness? What is it like? What are the symptoms? There's often these terms that are floating around. What is mania? What is psychosis? What is depression? For people who don't understand depression, what is it? I'm a doctor who lives with a mental illness. What is that like? What is that experience? Am I at a disadvantage? Am I at an advantage to have this role? Am I inferior to my colleagues because I have this deemed disadvantage, or am I more of an empowered patient? So, for me, I explain the interchange of those roles. What is the pro? What is the con? What is it like? So I talk about the various symptoms, the journey of living with depression. I made sure that my book was not scientific in the sense that it has this medical jargon that people can't understand. I wanted it to be user-friendly because I wanted to access people who might not be readers, but are wanting to understand. So that is Reflections of a Convoluted Mind, my pride and joy.
Yeah. And why is it important to share your lived experience with mental health, or for people living with mental health or mental illness rather, to share their lived experiences?
I feel that taking charge of our narrative is empowering. I wanted to validate my own experience. I had just seen how mentally ill people are portrayed in movies. You stand-up comedians love joking about it. When people see a mentally ill person, it's somebody who's wearing a straight jacket, wearing white, and literally, breaking walls or whatever they're doing. And I felt that, but that's not me. There's so much more to me. I'm not my illness, actually. I live with it, I have it, I acknowledge it. But when you look at Samke, there's so much more to me than bipolar disorder. I'm a sister, I'm a friend. I do so many other things. So I don't want to have bipolar to be that thing that's placed on my forehead and that's what I'm defined by. So that's why I just feel like, me speaking about it, I think will liberate other people who live with mental health issues who might not be diagnosed, and others who are yet to be diagnosed, to feel, especially when some illnesses are so stigmatized that it feels like a death sentence when you're told that you have a mental health condition. Various, at times maybe people can say, okay, I have anxiety. The minute you're told that you have bipolar, because of how it's perceived, that colleague who acts strangely, people will joke, that one is a bipolar. These terms get floated around. So then if you have to be diagnosed with it, how do you make peace with it? So I just decided to take charge. And I always say, I'm quoted quite often saying that the best storyteller about mental health issues is the person living with it.
Definitely. And where can we find your book if we're looking to get a copy?
Yes, the copy is available on Take a Lot.
Yes.
Amazon.com, Book Circle Capital. I'm still going to have it on my website, vocalmentality.com in due course. It's definitely far and wide, but online is the easiest platform to access it.
Okay.
So in your Kindle as well.
Yes. All right. And just in closing our episode, what do you know now about living with mental illness that you didn't know before?
What I know now is that you can live a quality, full life with mental illness. Denying it just perpetuates it. So taking ownership of the story, of the journey, is way more empowering than dismissing it. So that's what I've learned.
And just my final question around wellness in the workplace. What does wellness in the workplace mean to you?
Simply put, it's looking forward to coming to work. You're not dreading it. It's a part of your life's journey, not something that makes you miserable and unhappy. So I believe that wellness in the workplace is a place where you express who you are where you deliver from your skill, but not something that's so a source of unhappiness, basically. So I think that's wellness in the workplace.
I love that. I love that. Dr. Samke, thank you so much for coming today. Thank you for your transparency, your openness, your vulnerability. Really appreciate your insights.
You are most welcome. It's amazing how fast time flies.
I know.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sure. You can find Dr. Samke's page at vocalmentality_ on Instagram. And while you're there, you can follow Wellness in the Workplace _ as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Mbali Mzinyane. I will see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.